Hey all, Siege here, and today I want to discuss a detail I recently noticed in game that can answer a couple different long-standing questions I've had regarding the idea of consciousness within Warframe's reality. Just so you know, there could be multiple spoilers that follow for those who haven't yet made it through the game's story quests, so if you don't want to be spoiled on aspects of the greater narrative in the game, now's the time to click off, maybe finally finish that up and return when you're better prepared to hear what I'm about to say. For those of you who are sticking with me though, let me begin by asking you a question. What do you think of when talking about the soul, in particular as it relates to Warframe? Obviously, there will be some differing opinions on the matter, but as I see it, Warframe is one of the few games that actually acknowledges the existence of the soul, or at least something many of us equate to the soul, specifically among the Orokin society. Through the use of Kuva, the Orokin were able to transfer their consciousness from one vessel to another via the process of continuity. The question is, how does it affect the world as a whole? Given that we've essentially established the existence of a life essence transferable from one host to another, I think we also have to consider what happens to those souls in the greater context. For those whose bodies have been transferred into, what happens to the consciousness of that person? Like, say the Grineer Queen was successful in using Arteno's body. What would have happened to us? Does our soul just get destroyed? Does it assimilate with the new host, becoming a part of their life essence? And if so, does the personality of the assimilated manifest at all within the new consciousness? Or does it potentially become a ghost independent of its former body altogether? We really don't see any concrete evidence of a person changing after performing the continuity, but we also don't really have anything to compare it against either. If Ballas or the Queen had performed this ritual in the past, we wouldn't really have a large sample of what they used to be like to compare to what they are now, so I don't think we have a firm idea on what happens after the continuity is performed. Nonetheless, an observation I recently made may, and let me stress may, provide an answer here, as well as to another question I've had for quite some time regarding the Stalker. Namely, what stayed his hand against the Tenno shortly after being released from the transference pod on Lua during the second dream? When visiting Lua, it's possible to observe a familiar but completely baffling scene that has led me to some potentially strong speculation I want to share with you now. What I am specifically referring to are the ghosts that are seen in certain areas floating or kneeling. At first, I thought these to be Orokin people who just died during the collapse of their empire and have been tied to the area indefinitely. Perhaps as a kind of purgatory, forever roaming the halls as specters bereft of purpose without the possibility of redemption. Then I got to looking a little closer, especially the kneeling spirits, and I have to tell you, I think these could be Warframes. Headless Warframes, mind you, but if you look, they are much larger than the Tenno, even larger than other in-game NPCs, Teshin or those at Fortuna as examples. This led me to consider any instances of a character in-game that is known for both hunting Warframes and using decapitation as the method of execution. And only one character, at least as far as I can recollect, fits this description: the Stalker. Now, during the second dream, the Stalker is explicitly shown to present a beheaded Loki Warframe to Hunhao, and the Stalker is really the only entity known to have been on Lua that has the power to kill a Warframe, at least as it is right now. It could be argued during the Old War that Warframes were in fact murdered frequently, but as Orphic's Venom has shown us, and even a clip from the New War, some sentients have the power to suppress a Warframe altogether and disable them, but there's never any verifiable killing of them during the process. The method the Stalker seems to employ, however, directly parallels what we see here. I even think the argument can be made that this is a Loki based on the generally thin frame as well as his legs appearing to have the same design, at least from the knees up, but it's hard to verify that given the transparent nature of the entity. Could this in fact be the soul of a Warframe, once a regular person or soldier, prior to being turned into one of our bioweapons, mind you, who has potentially died? Interestingly, there is a second distinct group of entities floating around that look to be a bit smaller but are standing straight up. I feel like we can at least surmise that these aren't Orokin, or at least Orokin like we see them, as they tend to have an elongated arm as a pretty distinguishable characteristic. Well, other than the statue we see of Albert and Trotty at least. Regardless though, he and the other Orokin still seem to be much taller than this being consistently, and this little detail makes me think that the elongation of the arm in the Orokin may in fact be a result of the continuity. The stretching of the arm symbolizing an abnormal lifespan, much like the lifeline on the palm of a person distorted by the unnatural act being performed to extend their existence. Although, admittedly, that too is speculation at best and something that most likely requires a video all to itself. With all that being said, though, could they be Tenno? And if they are in fact Tenno and Warframes, as their models may seem to suggest, could they also be ghosts of victims of the Stalker? Now, if you're willing to follow me there, I feel like this could allude to why the Stalker didn't kill the Tenno in their first encounter on Lua, but then seemingly had no issue doing it when confronting us a second time on our orbiter. I believe this brief moment had to do with the realization that by killing the Warframes, he was in fact killing kids in the process, and may have done so a number of times before meeting us at the reservoir. Even Hunhao mentions,
"Your hatred is too weak, Shadow."
Meaning that he doesn't have the will necessary to get the job done once being shown exactly what he's doing. Didn't seem to be a problem right up until that point. I think we can all agree on that. After the initial shock, though, I believe he was able to refocus, allowing him to feel no remorse during our second encounter on our orbiter. Had he been successful on potentially other frames, it could suggest that maybe transference works kind of like the Matrix. If your Warframe experiences true death, like what we see in the second dream, versus how our Warframes die in mission where they can just be revived back to new, is it a stretch to consider the connected Tenno may die in the same way, at least in their mind, materializing as a beheaded soul? After all, the body cannot live without the mind, and the mind can make many things seem completely real even though they may not be actually happening to the person. The personalization of Umbra's ordeal through the Tenno being a bit of evidence to support that. During that quest, our Tenno can feel and even takes on the memories of Umbra as their own, showing a kind of symbiotic relationship that's formed between the two. Obviously, when looking at these characters, it's very hard to make out much detail, but it's the specific pose here that really sold me on the possibility of it all. Other than the Tenno and the Warframes, there are very few characters that utilize this particular kneeling pose. To me at least, the important connection here remains in the headless entities and the fact that DE showed the Stalker proving his kill to Hunhao by collecting the head of the Warframe. This Warframe right here ain't healing, and the Stalker seems to have a weapon capable of cutting right through their quote-unquote sword steel skin. I think the fact that this all shows on Lua too could lead to the idea that this is where these Tenno may have been killed, or at least where their living consciousness would have experienced death. The Warframes then could potentially come from those the Stalker encountered, possibly before getting to our transference pod. Remember, very few really knew what the Tenno actually were before this particular quest, many times with the Warframes themselves being referred to as Tenno. And I think it'd be limiting to believe that the Lotus only tapped a single Tenno to try to confront the Stalker once he was unleashed in the area. Even in the Stalker's Codex, during the quote-unquote salute to the Tenno by the Orican Emperors, where it is speculated said Tenno annihilated the Orican leadership, the driving force behind his hatred for them and you, mind you, he claims to have witnessed a torrent of blood within the stadium, loosed by Tenno blades. Have you ever seen a Tenno wield a blade? Seems like something we would be doing now quite frequently, given how many blades most of us own, and yet they don't. Implying there may be more to this story than what we've been led to believe. Add to that the fact that Hunhao was tipped off by Ballas as to where the Warframe's power came from, not the Lotus as was previously suggested during the second dream. The time frame of when this information was passed to Hunhao is really the only thing in question, but if we take into account Ballas' dialogue, I believe the thing Hunhao wanted from Nata was merely to remove the void mask that kept Lua hidden, making it accessible for, let's say, future endeavors. He would not have made it known that he knew where the Tenno were, because that could tip us off to the fact that there was an informant who knew this information, and I'm guessing that's something they were both trying desperately to keep under wraps until the appropriate moment. In the end, these could just be Warframes who lost in their own encounters. Did you die at all to the Stalker during your first encounter? Well, this could be you. It would appear that, at least to the Stalker and Hunhao, a headless Warframe is a truly dead one. So this may be the way he conducts his assassinations, potentially understanding this to be the only true way to permanently put one down. I think it's important to mention that Alad V also utilizes this method when trying to build his Zanuka project. The difference being, he seems to remove all of the Warframe's extremities, meaning the entities we see here would most likely not be his victims, if my theory has any weight to it. Again, it's tough to be certain of all that because of the lack of detail among these entities, but I do think this to be a legitimate possibility, mainly because of the context clues provided by DE. The method of beheading the Warframes, these headless specters floating around on Lua, which was first introduced to us during said quest. Their models looking strikingly similar to our Warframes and even Tenno, and I think it at least begs the question if these aren't just shadows of what we could have become if we would have lost. Souls trapped on the moon forever. I'm curious. What's your take on all this? Could Lua exist now as a type of graveyard for the victims of the Stalker? Its own arcane properties helping to project the fallen heroes in a manner we can see here but nowhere else? It already appears to exist as a graveyard for the Orcan Empire. This much is very apparent throughout, with multiple areas already collapsed, on the cusp of collapsing, or doing so as we pass by. Let me know what you think in the comments, especially if you have information that can either support or disprove this theory. Regardless though, I hope you enjoyed the video today and it got you thinking about what these things are and who's potentially responsible for their current state. Maybe we can unravel this mystery together in the end. At any rate, I hope you all have a wonderful day today, a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk at you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.